just answering this question makes a huge, huge difference. Very, very big difference. We're talking now about the question, where do we come from? We could have a natural origin or supernatural origin. We need to discern, if somebody's made a movie, written a book, what their particular perspective is. And we'll talk some more later in the class. We'll spend a whole day just talking on the significance of this question and testing your foundations in your ability to walk it out as a mature believer. The second question, we shouldn't be surprised, is where are you going? And there are two possible answers to that question. The first answer is we are going to man-made perfection. There's an alternative answer, and that is to a God-redeemed imperfection. This has to do with destiny. If you're reading an article, watching a movie, you want to see what the author has in his or her philosophy. There are those, and Marxism fits this particular picture the best. Marx said we are moving economically through a phase of capitalism. Eventually, every country will become socialistic. And when every country is socialistic, the barriers between the countries will fall, and everybody will be one big happy family, and each one will bring their abilities to serve the others, and be able to take from the general pool to serve their own needs. Now that is a man-made perfection. It's called utopia. And this idea is that we don't need God, but man on his own can bring about perfection. We know it's not perfect today, but give us enough time, and just now, we as men and women alone will make a perfect world. Ha, ha, ha. Now we know from the scriptures that we are not going to have a perfect world until Jesus returns. What we will see, because Jesus has come, has died, has been raised again, and sent His Spirit, is a growing situation where we see the work of redemption in individuals' lives and in the lives of nations. And so we as believers believe in a God-redeemed imperfection. We know this life will never be perfect until Jesus comes. If we look at an article, if we look at a movie and we ask the question, where are you going? Those who don't believe in God will often say, the key to this problem is education. Because if you don't believe in God, you really believe in education to solve everything. You and I, however, know that even if I know that I'm supposed to do this because it's good, does not mean I will do it. Knowing what I should do and actually doing it are two different things. Romans chapter 7, Paul says, the thing I don't want to do, I do. And the thing I want to do, I don't do. Because it's not just about knowing in the head, it's about the willingness of the heart to do what's right. So this area is a very, very important area. Where do we come from and where are we going? So as you do your homework, as you read the articles, look for a clue in terms of what the author believes about ultimate destiny. Are we going to a man-made perfection or a God-redeemed imperfection? I want to move on now to the next question. Remember, we're going to 5 questions, and question number 3. And here, when I write down question number 3, please write down the question, but don't write down the answers, because we're going to play with the answers first. So question number 3 is, how do you know? Well, how do I know what? Well, how do you know anything? So somebody says, I know it because my mother taught me. Yeah, but how did your mother find out? Well, her mother taught her. But you've got to keep pushing this back until you find out who was the first person to find it out. Of course, we learn when people teach us. But the discovery of that truth originally came a certain way. And so we're not talking about learning from people. We want to know how the people originally learned. Perhaps at school you heard the story of Archimedes. Archimedes was a Greek man who was studying how things worked. One evening or one day he got into his bathtub. As he got into his bathtub with the water in it, as he got in, he saw the water go up. And suddenly he understood how this whole thing works. When the body goes into water, it displaces the water, and it seems like the bath gets more full. And so the story goes that he jumped out of the bath, still with no clothes on, and ran down the street shouting, "Eureka, Eureka, I found it, I found it." So how did Archimedes find it? Anybody want to try? How did we find it? How did he find it? What was it that he did that enabled him to learn something nobody else knew yet? And the answer is, he knew, and remember, don't write this yet, we're going to come back and play with this. He learned by his senses. He got into the bathtub and he saw with his eyes, he saw the water rise. And so we can learn by our senses. We can learn this pulpit is hard. We can learn from our senses that ice cream is cold. We can learn from our eyes that this is a pleasant color. We learn that this is what somebody's doing. So senses is one way we learn. There is another way to learn. And perhaps you can think of it. How else do we get to know something we don't yet know? And so as you think about it, possibly you get to know about it because the Holy Spirit reveals it to you. And that's called revelation. And so we can write down, remember, not yet, we're playing with this. Revelation is a way to know. So there's two ways to know. Now there is another way to know. Remember, some people say that there is no God. So if you say there is no God, then there can be no revelation. So you can only write revelation there if you believe there's a God. But there's another way to know. Maybe you can think of it. Some people say that women have more of it than men. And of course, we're talking about intuition. Somehow you just know. Now, if you ask ladies, you'll find out that yes, they have intuition, a lot of it, but is their intuition always right? And of course, the answer is no. There are many situations when they suspect something or seem to know something, but it's not actually that way. So while we can learn something by intuition, it's not always true what we learn. And then of course our senses are sometimes a little deceptive. If you see a stick in the water and you reach for the stick, you find the stick's not there because the water has deflected the light beam. And so these are two areas where there is a limited ability to know. Often people call knowing by senses or knowing by intuition, they call knowing by reason. Knowing by reason. Some of you may have seen a painting by Raphael called The School of Athens. It shows two men walking through the entrance of this Roman-style building. And they're supposed to represent Plato and Aristotle. And Plato has got his finger up like this. And Aristotle has got his hand out like this. Plato is saying, I know what I know by intuition. Aristotle is saying the only way you can really know is if you see it by your senses. And so these are two ways that people say these are two ways to know by reason. And of course, the second way we can know is by revelation. So you can now write down the answers to these questions, the potential answers. How do you know? By reason or revelation. You understand now that there are two ways to understand by what people call reason, and that's by senses or intuition. By senses or intuition. And so as you read an article, as you watch a movie, try and discern, what does this person actually believe who wrote this article, who made this movie? Do they think you can only know by reason, or do they think you can only know by revelation? Now, of course, the secular thinkers think you can only know by reason. The Pharisees think you can only know by revelation. Biblical Christians know that you can know by both reason and revelation. There are some things that you know by reason, that this is hard, this is cold, this is soft. But then there are other things you can only know by revelation. Let me mention some things you can only know by revelation. The meaning of life is only known by revelation. You cannot get to know it by reason. It is discovered by revelation. Morals, what is right and wrong, is not learned by reason, it is revealed by revelation. Meaning and morals comes by revelation. Other things can be learned by reason. And so the biblical Christian understands that they can know by reason and revelation. Some things they get by revelation, some things by reason. We want to move on now to question number 4. This question says, what is the final measure? Perhaps you want to use the word, what is the final standard? Standard of what? Standard of measurement. How do you determine whether something is good or bad, right or wrong? What is the final way of measuring? Some people say it's fine to do this, but other people say it's not. Who decides? Where does the standard come from? And so when we're watching the movie, watching the television program, reading the article, reading the book, we want to know what this writer believes about what is the final measure. And there are two possible answers. The one is God, and the one is man. God is the final measure of right and wrong, and if He says it's wrong, it's wrong. Honor your father and mother if you want to live long on the earth. If you don't, you won't live long. It's wrong not to honor your parents. Man, of course, is much more changeable. In some societies, it's okay to do this. In other societies, the man says no. In some situations, people say there's a third answer. Please don't write it down. I'm just going to give you an idea. They say matter is a measure, material things of the earth. Once again, this is the attitude of Marxists and communists. They say the only thing that is eternal is matter. I don't think they have studied astronomy and the origins of the universe, otherwise they would know. But actually, the answer matter is actually the same answer as man, because man is deciding that matter is the measure, which of course is nonsense. And so we can take out matter and just leave it as God and man. And when people say matter is the measure, we realize that man is deciding that matter is the measure. So we're back to man. And so as we read articles, we find out that the people believe that whether this is right or wrong is decided by man, it's decided by courts, it's decided by parliament. Others say, no, this is wrong because it is wrong in the universe. Prostitution is immoral according to Revelation. It is always wrong. In some societies, they say it is legal. Man decides that it is moral. And of course, that's not the way it should be. So now you can go through and you can look at the articles and look for clues and evidence to see which one of these answers is appropriate for the article, the TV program, the movie you're watching. Generally speaking, as you read the article, you will find that the answers you come up with are consistent. Usually, if somebody has a natural origin, they will normally be after man-made perfection, after reason, and after man. But not always. Because you see, sometimes people are confused. They can act like there's a God, but then act like man is the final measure. And so we often find that there is a confusion in the situation. But through doing this, we discern. As we do this, we discover some things. We discover that God's truth is everywhere, and we discover that we can discern. We find out that there's some articles written in Time magazine that are biblical and true. They're not perfect articles, but generally they're following truth. There was an amazing set of articles in Newsweek magazine about 7 years ago talking about the resurrection of Jesus. It was a true article in Newsweek magazine, one of the most powerful articles on the resurrection I've ever read. But you know what? You can also pick up a Christian magazine and find out that the author has a very worldly view of things, and it's not truth at all. And so you can't just presume that because it's in a Christian magazine, it's true to truth. You have to learn to discern for yourself as a mature believer. Once again, I'm going to get a chair over here. Because we have one more question to go. And this is a slightly different question. We want to ask the question, what is the weight of the article? What is the weight of the article? Now that seems a strange question, so I want to demonstrate. Imagine that this article is written, published, and it is distributed, and it is sent out into the world. Imagine the floor is the sea of humanity. This article lands in the sea of humanity, and it causes waves. Now the question of weight is, are those waves big or small? But more importantly, the waves created by the article, do they draw people to God or away from God? It's kind of a summary question. Will this article bring change to the earth? And will the change be positive towards God or negative away from God? And so, that is the question of weight. We want to know, generally speaking, does this article take us to God or away from God? So now, the idea is that we're going to hand out, as you leave today, a number of articles. They will be stapled in the order that you should read them tonight. As you go to read them, ask the Holy Spirit to help you, and then read the first article through quite quickly. Get a general idea. Don't look for clues, just read it through, get a sense of it. Then read it through again, now looking for clues to these questions. Evidence, if you can find it. And if you find out a clue, evidence, write it down. Because when we get together tomorrow, we're going to ask you, I'll have a list of names, I'll call out a particular name and ask you to stand and tell us what the answers were that you discerned in the article. And then we'll have a discussion, come to a conclusion. about what is in the article, truthfully, as mature believers. Now, don't be surprised if when we do that, that you get it wrong. Perhaps you remember when you were trying to learn to ride a bicycle. I wonder if you fell off. I certainly remember falling off when I was trying to learn to ride a bicycle.